Hello everyone and welcome to the 16th episode of Viral Banter. We are getting an amazing response to this show and we really thank you all for listening this week and all our Generation Liberty members. Today we have 4 amazing guests on the show, including 2 new members of the Generation Liberty team, which is very exciting. But let's start with a familiar face, my always insightful assistant, Theodora.
Hi Renee, thank you for having me back on the show and it's good to see you all as always.
Yes, very good to see you again, Theodora. And another familiar face. Unfortunately, he has been grounded by Daniel Andrews like me, but he's always keen for a chat. Peumike.
Hi, Renee. We're definitely grounded, but great to be back on the show.
Yes, I hope you're on your best behaviour so Daniel Andrews will let us free sometime soon. And a new face to the Generation Liberty team. She attends possibly the finest education institution in the country, in my opinion, Campion College. Please welcome Elizabeth.
Hi, Renee. Thanks. I'm super excited to be here.
Yes, and we're very excited to have you on the show. And another new face to the Generation Liberty team. He attends Australia's National University in Canberra. Please welcome Connor.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm very happy to be here.
Now, I'll start with you, Elizabeth. Can you please just tell me a little bit about yourself, what you're studying and why you joined the Generation Liberty team?
Sure. So I am in my 3rd and final year at Campion College, where I'm studying a liberal arts degree and I'm majoring in theology. And I also run debating on campus where we get to discuss topical issues, the news and like politics and all of the fun stuff. And all of my values totally align with the IPA and Generation Liberty. I've been brought up conservative and libertarian, so very free market, free speech, and defending the rights of individuals. So when the opportunity presented itself, I just couldn't say no.
Well, that's very good to hear, Elizabeth.
Super excited.
I am very excited to have you. And Connor, we'll just get you to tell us what you're studying and also why you joined the Generation Liberty team.
Yeah, certainly. I'm a 3rd year at ANU studying a dual degree in law and international security studies. I joined the Generation Liberty team because I'm excited to see a common sense voice here at Canberra and at the ANU. It's certainly the case that here in ANU at least, there really is a shortage of a variety of viewpoints on campus. I mean, to the extent that there is a shortage of non-left-wing views on campus. If you call far left to very far left variety, then I think it's a great concern. That's all there is. Now, not only this, but I think there are plenty of threats to freedom on campuses in general. And I'm certainly excited to be part of this team fighting for common sense and values here in Canberra.
Well, that's very good to hear, Connor. And we'll actually start with you about that at ANU. So at your university, there is a petition to tear down a Churchill statue on campus. As it's stated in the petition, they see the statue as a symbol of white supremacy. First of all, I would like to ask you if you've heard much about this petition and do you think it's representative of most average students' view on the statue?
Yeah, I do know of this petition. In June this year, the ANU Ethno-Cultural Department launched it, calling on the university to remove, and I quote, non-critical representations of racist figures, starting with that of Winston Churchill. Now, can I just say, if they think Churchill is bad, wait until they hear about the guy he beat. This petition really is just an articulation of the vocal minority here at campus. The petition has been launched for, several months now, and it's only received 228 signatures. And I really wonder how many of them have actually come from ANU. It's just with most of Australia. The quiet university students here, I think at ANU, either don't care or see it for the farce that it is.
Yeah, well, that's good to hear. And I pretty much suspected that myself. When I looked at the signatures on that petition, I was thinking, how many of these are at ANU and how many of these are actually students signing this petition? But Peumike, as you know, Generation Liberty actually challenged this group to a debate over this issue. Can you explain what happened next?
Yeah, so like you said, Renee, we've following the petition, we approached ANU's ethnocultural department to have a debate. And we think debate is a good thing. It's a contest of ideas. We get to see their best arguments and we present our best arguments, and then we'd let the public decide what they think. But surprisingly, they refused. And you might ask, why would they possibly refuse such a great thing like a debate? Well, this is their response. They said that they were too traumatized to hear opposition arguments, and they didn't believe that we could have a nuanced discussion. Why? Because they were obviously so right, and we couldn't possibly present a valid case on our side. And I think this is kind of indicative of the radical left in general. They believe that they are so correct with everything that they're spouting that they shut off their ears and actively repress any kind of debate due to the risk of being offended or simply being wrong. And I'm sure you would agree with me, Renee, that it's thinking like this that's blatantly contradictory to our Western liberal democracy and values.
Yeah, I totally agree there, Peumike. It's really worrying when groups like this won't even discuss the issue. You know, they said that, you know, they didn't see it, that it would be productive, and that, you know, they were kind of accusing us of being almost a little bit aggressive by asking for a debate. But if you're going to come out with such an outlandish thing like this, like tearing down a Churchill statue, I think you should be prepared for people to come forth and say, actually, I disagree with you on this. Can we talk this out? But Theodora, you're actually studying history. So what are your thoughts on tearing down statues like this?
So look, I've obviously thought a lot about the subject of statues in general over the last few months because of the seemingly endless media coverage. And I think that ultimately I would share the opinion of the great Peter Hitchens, who recently said that unless the statues are connected to a regime, for example, a totalitarian regime which has brought only evil to the population, for example, statues of Hitler or Stalin, we ought to leave them alone. So on very, very rare occasions, tearing down statues can symbolize being liberated from such a regime. But in Australia, in Britain, in America, we've never really been in that situation. So regarding the Churchill statue specifically, you know, Winston Churchill was a man, and like all men, he had both flaws and good points. He was also a product of his time. But, you know, being a white man who lived in the 20th century is not a crime, although the radical left would have you believe so. But the reason he has statues in his memory all over the world is not because of his flaws, it's because of his contributions to the world, and his statesmanship and his role in defeating Nazism. So I think that it's a great shame, maybe the great shame of our generation, that our understanding of history and our generation's inability to understand the grand scheme of history has led to this movement, which is literally ignoring someone's role in defeating Nazism and instead focusing on his imperfections. So, yeah, when you realize that proponents of this Orwellian movement to erase world history, they can't see the forest for the trees, you know, you're left with a pretty dire outlook for our future. And I'll just finish by quoting Peter Hitchens. He said recently about the topic of statues, what do we gain by throwing them down? Only that cheap simulation of virtue which comes from damning sins we have no mind to, while committing the ones we are inclined to. And I think that about sums it up. There's absolutely nothing to be gained from taking down a statue of Churchill or any other historical figure other than destruction.
Yeah, I totally agree there. And, you know, it is true Churchill did some bad things and he wasn't perfect, but I don't think anyone has ever claimed that Churchill was a perfect figure. He is a famously flawed figure. And because of the context of his time, those kind of flaws, what would be seen as flaws, his stubbornness actually became strengths in, you know, a situation of war. He was the man of that moment and the man that the UK needed. And I think it's actually a real shame that, this group would not debate us, because I genuinely think that they misunderstand the point of the statue. That they say that the statue is celebrating white supremacy. I don't think anyone who put up that statue, created that statue, or looks at that statue, looks at it and says, yay, the supremacy of a certain race. It's just a massive misunderstanding of what that statue is for. But Elizabeth, I would like to ask your thoughts on this, and what do you think about them trying to tear down a statue of Churchill?
Yeah. So I've got a couple thoughts. Firstly, as someone who runs a debating society, I know how important it is for people to be challenged and have their ideas scrutinised. So even aside from the fact that who we're talking about is Winston Churchill, I think it's really unfortunate that the group advocating for this are not actually willing to defend it. And chances are, if you're shutting down a conversation, then the position you hold probably isn't a very strong one. So I think it's really unfortunate that that group isn't willing to have an alternative view expressed. And secondly, I think that if we could only ever have statues of perfect people, we probably wouldn't have any statues left. And the point of them is not to commemorate people who never did wrong, but to acknowledge those who contribute significantly to a society or events at a given point in time. And in the case of Churchill, his stance and campaign against both fascism and the Nazi regime should absolutely be applauded, because it played a huge part in defending Europe's liberal democracy. And finally, I also think it sets a really dangerous precedent. Statues are a tangible expression in a community, and when they're torn down, I think it's really only a matter of time before even speaking about the person becomes something we're not allowed to do either. I mean, if we can tear down his statues, are we allowed to learn about him in history or even speak about him? So I definitely think it sets a really dangerous precedent that we have to be wary of.
Yeah, I think you make some really interesting points there. And another thing I was thinking about when I was reading about Churchill and looking into this is that actually his flaws and, some of his darker aspects, so this is like kind of a psychological analysis, I think because he had done some bad things in his past, and because he had seen that darker side of human nature, that was why he recognised Hitler for what he was. Unlike many of the members of the UK Parliament at the time, who thought that they shouldn't get involved, that they should take an agreement with Germany. They couldn't, and everyone kind of forgets Hitler was on the front of Time magazine. People really didn't see him for what he was at the beginning. But Churchill pretty much did immediately. Peumike, I know you're interested in psychology. Do you agree with me on this, that he those flaws actually helped him realise what Hitler was? Absolutely.
I feel that you have to kind of see your own darkness before you can really address the darkness on the outside. And I think that's something that Winston Churchill was representative of. He recognised his own flaws. He knew that he was an imperfect being, and that made him more aware of what was going on outside. And he picked up on where Hitler was going and the path that Germany was leading, because at the time, the establishment was very much laissez-faire. Let them do what they want to do, and they won't interfere with us. But Winston Churchill, he was very aware of what was going on, was because of his own demons. And I think that's something that we have to be very responsive to nowadays as well in our society at the moment. Don't necessarily go with what the mob is saying, but recognise what's actually going on in society, what we really need to focus on, and maybe go within ourselves, self-reflect and see where are the issues that's facing humanity, and do we actually know which direction we're going down.
Yeah, I've always said that I feel like cancel culture right now is very much, it's a projection thing. So, Jung and Dostoevsky would say all this kind of criticism is something that you actually should internalize and look at the darkest part of yourself. But modern society kind of encourages this. Everything about you is perfect. You self-love, you don't have to change anything. So that kind of self-reflection is lacking in a lot of people. So they project it outwards, you're the bigot, you're the evil person, in order to avoid actually analysing themselves. But Connor, do you think that this will ever get enough traction to actually happen? And do you think that this statue is ever going to come down anytime soon at ANU?
Look, I think it comes down to two things. Firstly, the university administration will probably be more than happy to remove the statue, simply just because they don't want to get involved in fights or they don't particularly want to have the socialist alternative, who, let's face it, nothing better to do with their time, go in and swarm their offices. But secondly, the statue is actually owned by the Churchill Trust, which means if the statue is to be removed, they're going to have to get approval from the trust. Either way, though, since June, there really hasn't been too much general chatter at ANU about the statues, and it might actually very well be the case that it's no longer fashionable to the lefties here.
Yeah, let's hope that, this kind of dwindles off and that this kind of gets forgotten. There has been a campaign at Sydney University for a very long time, eons and eons, to tear down the statue of William Wentworth, who was the founder of Sydney University, also the writer of the New South Wales Constitution, which is what the Australian Constitution is based on, and actually fought for a lot of convict rights. I myself challenged the union at the time that was trying to tear down the statue to a debate multiple times, and the president of the union basically hid from me. I kept calling the office. She wouldn't answer my calls. I went to the building and she hid in her office. So these people are generally, I find, a little bit cowardice when it comes to actually fully discussing these topics. But let's move on from that subject and talk about something else that has happened in Canberra this week, and that is the new Foreign Relations Act, which is said to protect Australia's sovereignty, democracy and freedom, which is a quote from James Patterson. Peumike, can you give us a brief outline of this new act and what it means?
Absolutely, Renee. Now, the specific legislation will be introduced to Parliament next week, and if passed, will give the federal government the ability to tear up really any subnational agreements with foreign powers. And I think we have 42 or something like that on the list. And basically, the federal government will be given the power to approve or deny any current or future agreements with any foreign entity. And before I say anything else, I only think it's right to applaud Scott Morrison, because it's been a long time coming and should be greatly welcomed by all Australians. And the reasoning behind it is quite simple. Our federal government must be the ones in power to decide our course of foreign policy, and any state or territory government who thinks otherwise is overreaching and undermining the Federation itself. And with this proposal, we will hopefully make steps into returning to a unified national foreign policy agenda aligned firmly with Australia's national interests. And it's quite clear what triggered this, isn't it? It's a ludicrous, pathetic government here in Victoria and their Belt and Road Initiative. And don't forget, there's a lot which went behind the scenes to get this into fruition, with a lot of good people fighting for this cause. We have Senator James Patterson, like you're talking about, but Andrew Hastie as well. But thank God we're at this stage, and he's hoping that it gets passed next week.
Yeah, actually, leading on from your comments there, Peumike, about states and, them kind of infringing on their powers, a lot of people have said that this particular bill could actually infringe on states' rights. What are your thoughts on that, Connor?
To authorise this legislation, the Commonwealth is using what's known as the External Affairs Power in Section 51 of the Constitution. And this head of power is actually often associated with controversies regarding the Commonwealth infringing on the powers of the states. And the exact scope of this power has actually been under quite a lot of debate, and it's been argued that it's been expanding. Famously, in 1983, it was used by the Hawke government to disallow the Tasmanian Liberal state government from building a hydroelectric dam in the state's southwest. But look, even as a staunch federalist like myself, that there really aren't the same issues here that popped up in the Tasmanian Dams case, or that often pop up when talking about this head of power. As Scott Morrison has said, and as was previously addressed before, protecting and promoting Australia's national interests is the primary job of the federal government. It's not the states. The states don't even have a foreign affairs department. Foreign relations really is clearly the role of the Commonwealth, and this legislation simply ensures that Australia speaks with a united voice.
Yeah, I really agree with you there, Connor. And, my husband's actually a Federation era historian, so he studied the Constitution, he studied this area of history. And yes, foreign relations is one of the few things that's actually outlined when federation happened. That is the power of the federal government. And also, I have a little bit of a lack of sympathy for the states when they try to claim states' rights, because I am a federalist. I would like to see a lot of powers returned to the states. But they can only get those rights returned if they are willing to take back, in my opinion, the income tax and actually raising their own revenue. They can't take power without responsibility. And when the Liberal government did come forth and say that they were thinking of returning things like GST and income tax to the states, none of the state premiers wanted it. Only the New South Wales Liberal government was considering it, while all the other states did not want to take back that responsibility. So it can't be they have their cake and eat it too, in my opinion. But Theodora, what are your thoughts on this move by the federal government?
I think it's definitely a good move, and it's very necessary. As a Victorian, I've been deeply concerned about the lack of transparency around Dan Andrews' Belt and Road deal. So I obviously don't think that state governments should be able to, the creeping influence of the CCP on university administrations and in university classrooms. So we've seen problems arise with Confucius institutes around the country. We've seen students being attacked or landing in trouble for openly criticizing China, as is the case, for example, with Drew Pavlou at the University of Queensland. So I think that this decision from the federal government has come not a moment too soon. And I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of developments may come out of this.
Yeah, I think I agree with you there. Its impact on the university sector is going to be very interesting to watch. Now, Elizabeth, I would also just like to hear your thoughts on this new act.
Yeah, I think it's overall a very positive move, because I think it would be very unifying for Australia to have a sort of solid and consistent and very transparent stance when it comes to international agreements and those sort of things, especially regarding China. So overall, I would still like to look at the specifics of it, but I definitely think it's a really positive move.
Yeah, I think I agree with you there too. But moving on from that topic, one of the most popular segments on Viral Banter has been our recommendations, and we also have been doing recommendations on the Generation Liberty website, our top 5. A few weeks ago, we did best YouTube channels, so a very modern form of entertainment. So this week, I thought I would go a little bit different with favourite movies, but there is a caveat. I want you to name your favourite movie that was made before 1970. So we're talking some classic films here. Theodora, I know you're a classic film buff, so we'll start with you.
Well, this one was even tougher to narrow down than my favorite YouTube channels. I honestly watch way more classic movies than I do new ones, but I've managed to come up with a top 2. So the first one is the 1938 movie, The Adventures of Robin Hood, starring Australia's own Errol Flynn, actually. And this one I've chosen because it's been a favorite of mine since before I could even properly comprehend the plot, honestly. I've watched and rewatched it so many times with my family, and I never get tired of it. And recently I had to watch it for uni because I'm doing a subject about film music, so I've gained a new appreciation for the absolutely beautiful music by Eric Korngold, so I can't recommend it highly enough. And the second one has to be the timeless, but now unfortunately cancelled classic Gone with the Wind. It's the definition of an epic movie, and it shaped so many of the Hollywood epics of later years. I honestly think that anyone who thinks it should be cancelled either hasn't seen it or is just jealous that the movie is so good. I don't know. But yeah, if anyone out there hasn't watched it or Robin Hood, get on it right now.
Some very, very solid choices there. But I'll move on to you, Elizabeth. What is your favourite classic film?
For me, it definitely has to be 12 Angry Men. I think it's so prevalent, especially in today's day of sort of this cancel culture we've got going on, that we've really gotten rid of that sense of you're innocent until proven guilty. And I think the movie absolutely plays on that. And it's not the most fast-paced movie, but it's such a brilliant watch. And I 100% recommend for anyone who's looking for a good movie. So
I'll definitely have to revisit that. I watched that when I was like 7 because my parents were very into giving me a very in-depth film education, but I can barely remember it now, as you can imagine. Peumike, we'll go to you next. What is your favourite classic film?
Elizabeth beat me to it. It's still every as well. I love that movie so much. It's, for those who don't know, it's shot in one room and it's in black and white, but it's such a gripping story. And I think it's more poignant now, especially considering everything that's going on with people quickly jumping to conclusions and gathering with the herd when the truth may be far from what they're actually thinking. And the acting was impeccable because they kind of have to be impeccable because it's in one room, right? And it's stuck in that one room. But it's a great movie. Everyone should watch it. It's a classic. Couldn't recommend it enough.
Yes, I think there's a lot of agreement around that film. Connor, what is your favourite classic film?
Oh, I love a good spaghetti western, and I particularly love the 1960 film, The Magnificent Seven. I even just love the tagline. There were 7 and they fought like 700. I remember watching it as a kid and just being, inspired that even a small team can do great things.
I like that choice. Well, my choice is actually going to be a comedy. I am a big comedy buff, and I think I have to say that my favourite film is the 1933 classic Duck Soup by the Marx Brothers, which is probably, it's not technically their first film. I think Coconuts is their first on-film film, but Duck Soup is generally recognised as their most their famous early film, first, one that was a real hit. And it is just a marvel of slapstick comedy and also really, really brilliant written comedy. And Groucho Marx, who's one of my idols, is absolutely brilliant in that. And he is actually the basis of a lot of Bugs Bunny. If you go back and watch a lot of Groucho Marx, you'll actually see a similarity to the early Bugs Bunny films. And I think I actually also have a Groucho Marx quote on my wall here, which is, "Politics is the art of looking for trouble, finding it everywhere, diagnosing it incorrectly, and applying the wrong remedies," which I quite like. So I definitely recommend Duck Soup to anyone for a classic comedy film. But now it is time for one of our favourite segments of the show, Viral Banter Battle. Now, facing off this week is Peumike and Theodora, but I'm going to make a change this week. You can have your lifeline team buddies. So if you two do not know the initial the answer to the question, I will throw to the other two. So Elizabeth, you can be on Peumike's team, and okay. Connor, you can be on Theodora's team. So this week, we are going to be talking all things political correctness. Okay. So first off, I think this is quite an easy one to start with. Which 1990s Arnold Schwarzenegger film, so this is just for Theodora and Peumike to begin with, which 1990s Arnold Schwarzenegger film was pulled from a film festival in America for, quote, romanticizing the over-policing of children?
Peumike?
Terminator? Incorrect. Theodora, do you know?
I don't think I've ever seen an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie.
You watch too many classic films.
Yeah, I know. Regretting it now.
It was also, quote, said to be encouraging the pipeline of school to prison system. I'll give you that clue as well. Connor or Elizabeth, do you know this?
No, I don't think so.
I don't know the title, but I do. I'm trying to remember the title.
Come on, Connor.
I'll give you another quote. The quote from the film. It's not a tumor.
Yeah, it's not a tumor. My dad used to quote it. I don't remember.
Okay.
No.
Oh, no one got this. Maybe it's two of my time. It's actually the 1990 classic Kindergarten Cop.
Oh.
And I'll give you a bonus point though. In what city was this festival? And what city called for this to be banned? Think of the most woke city in America, pretty much.
Seattle.
San Francisco?
No.
New York?
No. Where all the worst rioting is happening right now?
Seattle?
Milwaukee.
Actually, it's Portland, Oregon.
Oh, Portland.
Oh, right.
Damn it.
Okay, so this is the next one. Which British surrealist comedy starring Julian Barrett was removed from Netflix this year after accusations of racism?
Help me out, Connor.
Elizabeth, I need your wisdom as well.
I think I know.
It's
Can I
the
jump
blind
in?
leading the blind here.
Is it Little Britain?
That was removed, but this one stars Julian Barrett. I'll give you a hint. Soup, a tasty soup. It's a famous line from the show. Oh my God, you guys need some comedy, need some comedy education.
I like my comedy pre-Hays Code, Renee.
Okay, I'm going to be really upset if none of you have heard of this show. It's the Mighty Boosh. Has anyone heard of it?
I've heard the name, probably from you. I've never seen it.
Everyone has to go out and watch the Mighty Boosh. It is one of the best weird surrealist comedy series, in my opinion. And it was I was really, really upset when it was removed from Netflix. But let's hope you can get the next one. Which Australian singer recently said that political correctness has an asphyxiating effect on the creative soul of society, and that cancel culture is bad religion run amok?
Theodora? Is it Nick Cave?
Correct. First point on the board for Team Theodora. Okay. Next one is, I'll give you a point for each, and this was quite easy. Which two states in Australia did Victorian Green State Senator candidate Lydia Thorpe call to be renamed?
Peumike, Queensland, and Victoria.
Correct. So 2 points for Team Peumike. So this is a last question to see if we can get a tie. Which episode of Fawlty Towers was pulled and eventually reinstated by the BBC for racial slurs?
Theodora. I mean, I don't know if it's the name of the episode, but the one that says "Don't mention the war."
I think I might have to take that if no one has the actual answer. Theodora, I'll give you...
It's Connor? The Germans. Is it just called the thought it was just the Germans.
It's called the Germans, yes, correct.
There you go.
Awesome.
So that's 2 versus 2. I wonder if I could get one more point out of this. I'll see if I can think of a tiebreaker. I'll give a tiebreaker. What was Nick Cave's most recent band called?
Most recent band?
Yeah, so what's his most recent band called?
He's in a band?
Well, I think we might have to end on a tie because that's Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds.
Yeah, I'll take it.
I'm
having a tie with Theodora, so that's
I think you all need an education in the woke so you can recognize your privilege and realize how politically incorrect our society is. But that was definitely a nail-biting finish. And I would like to thank all my guests for this amazing 16th episode of Viral Banter. Thank you, Theodora, Peumike, Connor, and Elizabeth for coming on the show.
Thank you, Renee.
Thank you.
And if you are not a member of Generation Liberty yet, you can join at generationliberty.org.au for only $10 and you'll get an awesome welcome pack, including stickers, books, bottle openers, and all things fun and all things that are sure to trigger some of your most left-wing friends on campus and in school. So I hope you will join sometime soon. But for now, thank you for listening and make sure that you stay safe, stay happy, and stay free.